Ambedkar's conception of social democracy. Ambedkar not only conceptualized democracy suited to Indian conditions, but also fought for realization of the ideals of democracy. He addressed the question of social dynamics arising out of the functioning of a democratic government in an undemocratic society. He articulated the concerns of people who were deprived of basic civil rights. To understand his conception of democracy, we have to look into his writings, speeches, struggles and his involvement in nation-building through his participation at various levels in the British Indian government and independent India. In his efforts, we may find his quest for real democracy, social equality, freedom, associated living, just social order and moral governance are recurring themes in his writings and his struggles for liberation of the oppressed. Ambedkar defines democracy distinctly, addressing historical, political social democracy and social specificities of India and puts it in a philosophical way. He views democracy as a desired moral principle of governance and suggests mechanisms to enrich it for the common good. In other words, Ambedkar aspires to nurture the culture of democracy in all spheres of life. For him it is not just an ideal, but also a social necessity to build a good society. Democracy is based on the doctrine of one man, one value. The fundamental principle of modern democratic states is the recognition of the value of the individual. It is based on the belief that each individual has but one life, and full opportunity should be accorded to each to attain his maximum development in that life. Neither of these propositions can be said to be part of the accepted philosophy of aristocracy of India. According to Ambedkar, a democracy is quite different from a republic as well as from a parliamentary government. The roots of democracy lie not in the form of government, parliament or otherwise. Before adopting parliamentary democracy in India, Ambedkar had critically evaluated the functioning of parliamentary democracy in the West. He identified that wrong ideologies and wrong organizations were responsible for the failure of democracy in the Western countries that had adopted democracy as a form of government. The rulers were always drawn from the ruling class, and the class that was ruled never becomes the ruling class. So democracy did not fulfill the hopes it held out to the common man of ensuring to him liberty, property and pursuit of happiness. Socialism is an alternative to parliamentary democracy, and many countries had adopted this form of government. However, Ambedkar was critical of this form of government and identified it with dictatorship. Ambedkar upholds parliamentary democracy over socialism by giving a new meaning to democracy. He extended the spirit of democracy from political to include both social and economic domains. His conception of state socialism internalized the principle of socialism and carried it through the democratic form of government. He favored state socialism without dictatorship and with parliamentary democracy. He prescribes state socialism through the law of constitution. His vision of democracy is to strike a balance between equality and liberty so that associated living in a pluralistic society is ensured. Ambedkar explains that parliamentary democracy rests on four premises. A. The individual is an end in himself. B. The individual has certain inalienable rights, which must be guaranteed to him by the Constitution. C. The individual shall not be required to relinquish any of his constitutional rights as a condition precedent to the receipt of privilege. D. The state shall not delegate powers to private persons to govern others. Ambedkar's notion of parliamentary democracy is not confined to political domain only but deals with social and economic issues too. He laid down the following preconditions for the successful working of modern democracy. There must be no glaring inequalities in the society. There must not be an oppressed and suppressed class. There must not be a class which gets all privileges and a class which gets all the burdens to carry. The opposition must be strong and effective. Law and administration must be equal for all. Constitutional morality must be observed. For Ambedkar, democracy is more than a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living. The roots of democracy are to be searched in social relationships, in terms of associated life between the people who form a society. He has this to say about society: the qualities which accompany this unity are praiseworthy community of purpose and desire for welfare. loyalty to public ends and mutuality of sympathy and cooperation. The existence of the caste system is standing denial of the existence of those ideals of society and therefore of democracy. The caste system depicts the evils which cut at the very roots of democracy. According to him, democracy is that form and method of government whereby revolutionary changes in the economic and social life of people are brought about without bloodshed. He criticizes the dominant tendency that views politics and ethics as two different and unrelated realms. He suggests that politics cannot be conceived separately from ethics. He emphasizes democracy as a moral social order rather than mere political governance. His view of democracy connects both social and political aspects as a part of common moral sphere. Ambedkar argues that democracy requires a moral order in society. In this direction, he further enriched his earlier definition. According to him, democracy is not merely a form of government. It is primarily a mode of associated living, of conjoint communicated experience. It is essentially an attitude of respect and reverence towards our fellow men. Democracy is spoken of as free government. Free government means that in vast aspects of social life people are left free to carry on their life without interference of law, or a flaw has to be made. Then the lawmaker expects that society be founded on morality to make the law a success. Ambedkar observed that only Lasky categorically proposes moral order as the basis of democracy. Ambedkar further adds that democracy requires public conscience. Public conscience means conscience which becomes agitated at every wrong, no matter who is the sufferer, and it means that everybody, whether he suffers that particular wrong or not, is prepared to join him in order to get him relieved. For Ambedkar, democracy is not merely a form of government. It is essentially a form of society. A democratic form of government presupposes a democratic form of society. The formal framework of democracy is of no value and would indeed be a misfit if there were no social democracy. Ambedkar believed that political and economic revolutions have no meaning unless a social revolution takes place. He cites examples from history that show that political revolutions have always been preceded by social and religious revolutions. In other words, he argued for ethically constituted society for effective functioning of democracy. In the Indian context, he argued for the abolition of the caste system and viewed it as antisocial in spirit for its divisive, discriminatory, hierarchical and exploitative character. He further identified that these features of the caste system's social democracy are regulated by the Hindu social order. To realize social democracy, one requires an attitude of respect and equality towards one's fellow human beings. The social organization must be free from rigid social barriers. Democracy is incompatible and inconsistent with isolation and exclusiveness. Ambedkar observed that in Hindu society, there are privileges for few and disabilities for the vast majority. Hindu society offers no rights which the moral sense of man could recognize. Ambedkar upheld social democracy as viewed by M.G. Renaud. Ambedkar believed that Renaud struggled to craft rights and aimed to create a social democracy, without which there could be no sure and stable politics. He further endorses Renaud's position that you cannot be liberal by halves. You cannot be both liberal in politics and conservative in religion. The heart and head must go together.